Welcome, friends, to another episode of Beauty and the Biohacker, where we explore the latest tools and trends in self-care, aesthetics, and peak performance to help you live your most beautiful life from the inside out. I am Katie Moore, your co-host. I am somewhat of the biohacker side of Beauty and the Biohacker. I've got 3 years of experience self-experimenting in the space of, product reviews, biohacking, gadgets, gizmos, all that good stuff. And of course, I'm joined by the very beautiful Rachel Varga.
Welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to hang out with my super fabulous friend at a distance, Katie Moore. And my name is Rachel Varga. If you're new here, I am a board certified aesthetic nurse specialist, celebrity skin expert, international clinical trainer. I also write academic papers. So I am kind of like that super skin nerd. And I love looking at ways to innovate how we can optimize our skin from the inside out and from the outside in. The skin is our largest organ. And I'm really interested in bringing to light certain tips and tricks for you to optimize your body, mind, spirit, energy. And that does typically happen through biohacking as well. So really stoked about today's conversation.
And today we actually have a very special guest. I'm going to have her introduce herself in just a moment. Her name is Orshi McNaughton. She's actually in San Diego right now, beautiful San Diego, lives right along the beach. So amazing. She's a former fitness trainer, personal trainer. She's owned a bunch of fitness studios, and she's been dealing with a lot of health issues lately, including mold toxicity, and has really figured out the ways to tap into biohacking modalities to help heal herself from the inside out. She has an amazing brand called Biohacker Chick. You guys all need to go check that out. And Orshi, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. That's fantastic. And I, love your story. I love the idea of really taking health into your own hands, especially when it comes to something like mold toxicity, which can be really hard to diagnose. And we can certainly get into that in today's episode. But I'd love to know, just kind of from a surface level, how did you first get interested in biohacking, and what was sort of that like aha moment that inspired you to create this Biohacker Chick brand?
Yes. My first entry point into like health and wellness was about 12 years ago. And that was sort of my entry into the fitness industry. But at the time, the only tools I had was really fitness and nutrition and maybe lifestyle changes. And as I was working with literally thousands of people over the last decade, I kept discovering that this toolkit was not enough, that people were not completely succeeding. A lot of people came to us for weight loss and wanting to get stronger and feel better. But, a lot of people ended up on this yo-yo diet train of sort of just losing weight, gaining it right back. And it was really sad to see that. And when people were getting into their 30s, 40s, 50s, and older, I had less and less options to offer them besides nutrition and fitness. And that's sort of what started to get get me really interested in health optimization and all the other ways of sort of optimizing your health. But my first entry point of actually understanding the word biohacking and really sort of going down that rabbit hole was in 2017 when I first came across this diagnosis of having issues with mold through a functional medicine practitioner who ran some tests, and they actually suggested that I watch the Moldy movie, which is Dave Asprey's documentary on mold. And that movie sort of got me into this community and really opened up a whole new world to me of health optimization. And of course, I got completely sucked into it and never looked back ever since. Now with Biohacker Chick, I started this brand just last year. I sold one of my businesses, and I really felt like this is going to be the future. The next thing in health and wellness is going to be um, we can put this under this umbrella of biohacking. This is such a broad umbrella of really health and wellness optimization, or whatever you want to call it. I think we all have our own definition of what that means. And with Biohacker Chick, I really felt like there should be a platform and a forum for women to exchange ideas and sort of share what's working for women specifically. And so I wanted to dedicate this platform for looking at things through the filter of women's health. And I know we're probably going to get into this in a little bit, but it's about this space being so dominated by male influencers, which is amazing, and they are all, have the right place because they are experts. But I feel like now we need a little bit more conversations through that filter of women's health.
I love that. And I think that's really beautiful how you said it. So I'm going to ask you the question, what is the one biohack that you cannot live without? And I'm also curious if you can kind of layer with the clients that you've worked with, what are some of the common threads that you see clients doing that are your most thriving, vibrant clients? And the reason I ask this is because, as a clinician myself, for the last 10 years, offering 20,000 rejuvenation procedures later, international clinical trainer, I started to take notice of anecdotal data from my clients, especially women in menopause, that were thriving, especially over this last year. Women that were doing really well, they were kind of holding it down even for their daughters that had young kids, and they had cultivated particular body, mind, spirit, energy practices. And I also started to observe a lot of those truly radiant, vibrant clients of mine were either doing like ancient practices, or they were also doing biohacking, or they were, smashing it together. So I'm curious what your number one can't live without biohack is, and what you see your most vibrant clients doing.
It's so funny that you say that because responding to this question, I thought it was going to be a weird answer, but you just basically were talking about how, for me, mindfulness, meditation, and spirituality actually sort of made the biggest shift in as far as my happiness scale, because we want to optimize obviously our physical health, and a lot of what we're going to talk about has to do with that, getting healthier and having a highly functioning body and mind, right? But for me, mindfulness, meditation, and spirituality, which I'm kind of lumping into this together, is what really moved the scale as far as being more content, joyful, happy, and feeling like I have a more fulfilled life. Sorry about that. And also just this idea of service to others, being service to others, and finding your own purpose and mission of how can I best serve other people. And that was partly behind of this idea of starting Biohacker Chick, of creating a little bit more platform where I can serve people globally instead of just locally. And by the way, I'm in San Clemente, so almost in San Diego. So I'm technically in Orange County, but instead of being just a local business, I want to be able to get the message out to a wider audience.
So, what is your one biohack you cannot live without?
Well, again, talking about the mindfulness, meditation, spirituality, and how I got into that, and I probably don't want to go too far down on this rabbit hole, but I spent some time in the Amazon rainforest with the Shipibo people doing some psychedelics, ayahuasca, and I really felt like that mindfulness meditation slash, being cut off from the busyness of our life and getting out of that. And it really kind of cracked me open to spirituality, and shifted my understanding of what is out there. I would kind of describe it as, somebody who lives their life in a small room and does not know that there's another world out there. And when there's, let's say, an earthquake and you have a crack in the wall, and all of a sudden you can see through that wall and see that there's a much bigger world out there, and you venture out, you will never want to go back to living in that small room again. So that was my experience with being in Peru for a couple of weeks with no running water and electricity, and just kind of living a much more simple life. Really allowed me to realize that I was operating in this really narrow bandwidth of emotions, of not being ever really sad or being extremely joyful, but just kind of having this small range of not really experiencing my emotions and being a little bit numb to the world. And once I had this experience and I could really understand the full spectrum of human life that I was missing out on, I realized I never wanted to go back to that. And I wanted to keep exploring how can I expand my own bandwidth. And I hope that makes sense.
Totally. And I'm just curious, like, how did you emotionally and mentally prepare for a trip like that? Because I think there's so many people that just think they can like fly to Peru and do the ayahuasca thing and just like come back different. But I've heard that it doesn't always work unless you've done the mental kind of prep work before that. So what did you actually do to get yourself ready?
That's a great question. So I think people that are interested in this keep doing a lot of research, and um, I had a whole nutritional dieta that you follow for 6 weeks before you even start. That sort of kind of ramp you up to doing the sort of the ayahuasca and all the plant medicine, and just to be fully immersed in this experience. Uh, and I did that in combination of mindfulness and meditation retreat, and we did a lot of yoga and other things in combination of this like several weeks that I was there. I think it was really important to do it in that environment and not like in someone's backyard in an urban stressful environment. I think it all sort of synergistically and energetically work together to um, give you the transformation that you personally need, which is very different from everybody.
So, what would you say with, for example, IV therapy? You did this particular nutrition prep work for your ayahuasca journey, and I'll just share anecdotally, I've seen some clients do really well. And after having a journey, I can actually just see like a brightness, different perspective that they have. But I've also seen other people have to do it like 16 times and they keep doing it. It's like, is it really working for you? So I think to each their own, and everything we talk about here, just to FYI, isn't medical advice. It's for educational purposes only. If you think you have something going on with your physical body, with your mental health, be sure to seek the guidance of a licensed physician. But I'd love, Orshi, your take on, detoxifying our body of heavy metals. Because if you think about it, we are beings and we are, heavily ionic. We have protons and we have electrons, positive, negative. And I have heard people say that if we have an accumulation of heavy metals in our body, it can actually interfere even with some of the ionic signaling and even our ability to ground. So I'd love for you to just spend a hot second talking about IV therapy and chelation and, maybe some scientific clinical research resources.
Yeah, so I had sort of a double whammy with mold and heavy metal toxicity, and I am still kind of going through the process of emptying my stress bucket, so to speak. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to briefly go into this analogy that I like to explain that I feel is such a good way of understanding the body as a whole system working together. Because I think when it comes to detoxing any type of toxins from your body, it really depends on your overall load of toxic load and your ability to detox that. So I like to use the idea of the stress bucket, or some people call it the rain barrel, where just imagine that your body and your health is this giant bucket, right? And you have your emotional, spiritual, psychological stress, environmental stressors, your work stress, your financial pressures, your poor diet, your relationship stress, your lack of sleep. Everything kind of goes into this bucket, and it's a stressor for you, right? Even things like exercise, that would be a good type of stress, still goes into your stress bucket. And sometimes, and this is why when we are doing things that are have like a hermetic effect on our body, like, you know, doing an ice bath, or doing, or doing hardcore weightlifting, or any of those things, you have to look at that in context of what else is you've got going on in your body and how stressed your body is already. Now, your bucket has sort of a drain on the bottom, and that's your body's ability to sort of recharge and detox. And what helps with that is things what we just talked about, like mindfulness, spending time with loved ones, you know, exercising in a healthy amount, family, having friends and family in your life, and then of course having a healthy diet, not putting too many chemicals in your body, not being, exposed to environmental toxins and all that, healthy lifestyle that kind of helps you drain your bucket. And everybody's sort of size of your bucket and how quickly you can drain it is different. So when you're younger, you have a bigger bucket. And as we age, our bucket starts shrinking, unfortunately. And also our ability to detox, which is sort of the drain in your bucket, is different based on your genetics as well as your epigenetics. And and also your lifestyle. Obviously, the lifestyle is a huge factor in that. So I was one of those people that had already a smaller bucket and had the drain clogged. And my detox pathways were really impaired. And I really didn't realize that until really the last couple of years that I've been getting into trying to detox both from heavy metals and mold. So sorry for taking this roundabout approach to answering your question, but I had to take things in order to try to start unclogging my bucket, so to speak. And I've gone through um, a lot of different healing modalities to try to get the mold first detox from my body. And once I saw some progress in that is when I started the heavy metal detox. It's hard to do everything at once, although a lot of the modalities work the same way. It detox both mold and heavy metals at the same time. So for me, the IV chelation therapy is what I'm doing now, is kind of the last step to a lot of other type of modalities of detox I've been doing to get to the point that my bucket is sort of draining. You don't want to be doing IV chelation and any type of sort of, taking chelating agent, whether it's you taking it orally or you're doing it through IV, until you know your body actually can eliminate the toxins from your body. So if your bucket is completely clogged, I wouldn't recommend rushing into that. So for me, this is after like a year of doing many, many different modalities of detoxing. So to answer your question, I'm doing a couple of different things. I'm taking an oral binder, which is a DMSA that I'm taking orally. And you take it sort of in cycles. So you'll also have rest days, and then you take binders and a whole bunch of other things with it in order to not only bind it, but effectively remove it from your body. And then with the chelation therapy, with the IV chelation, we are using DMPS, and there's a lot of different types of chelating agents, and it depends on what type of metals you have in your body. You have to find out what binds best to that specific metal. So for me, it's mostly mercury and lead that I need to pull out of my body. And we actually, with the physician I'm working with, she tested 3 different types of chelating agents, and we run tests after each each chelation therapy, and then we look at the results and see what's binding and pulling things out the best. And so we settled on DMP as being the best chelator for me. And so we've been doing a IV chelation every 2 weeks, followed by other type of detox modalities, such as doing colon hydrotherapy, taking a lot of fiber and other type of binders. And so it's a very long process. One thing that I really was surprised of, really how long it really takes to pull metals out of your body. Right now I'm doing a 6 week cycle, and then at the end of 6 weeks we are looking at my numbers, like every other time that we are testing my metal levels. And it's very hard to tell exactly how much you have left in your body, because when you're trying to pull out, especially mercury, the analogy I could use is like hitting a bee nest with a baseball bat, and you're going to have a certain amount of bees that fly out every time, and your your body's sort of load that you carry, the metals are absorbed in your tissues in various different places in your body. So every time you try to pull them out, there's a certain amount comes out. And when you're doing these tests, you have to sort of gauge with a very experienced physician that you can work with, that can really gauge which direction your levels go. And sometimes it's very confusing, both with mold and with heavy metals, because when you're doing your testing, if you have a really impaired detox, your detox pathways are very impaired. When you test initially, you may see very low numbers, like hardly have anything coming out. It's partly because your body is incapable of even releasing it, right? So I had to go through all these modalities of detoxing before it started to even come out of my body.
I was, yeah, I was actually going to ask you about what the test is. Is it a blood test? Is it a urine test, hair sample? Like, how do they actually measure your levels each time? And then following up with that, I'd love to know how draining it is to go through all of these rounds of chelation. Do you feel exhausted after?
There's also another method of testing that I've done with one of my practitioners, which is actually muscle testing.
That's one I have not tried, the muscle testing, but there, as Katie mentioned, there are your hair, urine, and blood are the ways to test it. Now they all show kind of different things. So my understanding is that blood's going to show the most if you have like recent exposure, and that's mostly is going to show like if you're eating a lot of fish, for example, and you're getting a lot of mercury exposure from that, it will probably show up in your blood if you have really high levels. If you have, so you have, for example, methyl mercury, which comes from fish, that will show up, I believe, in your hair samples, and inorganic mercury will show up in your urine. For example, from your amalgam fillings, your silver fillings that may be leaching mercury into your body. So a company, for example, Quicksilver, have a tri-test that measures all three. Doctor's data measures through a urine test, and that's the one I've been using, because for me it's primarily inorganic mercury that's being pulled out. So it's a very complicated. I don't think there's a simple answer. You really got to go and see an expert that understands heavy metal chelation. And I have to say, I had a very hard time finding somebody who really knows how to do this. So I had to go through a lot of sort of functional medicine doctors to find one that actually really understands the process.
And in addition to that, like, how difficult was this to actually diagnose? Like, how many years did you basically go through symptoms of mold toxicity, heavy metal exposure, and not actually know what was the root cause, right? Like, because a lot of the symptoms, from what I understand, and you can verify which ones you felt, like brain fog, headaches, maybe digestion issues, like, and I'm certain there were skin issues too, and you can probably talk a little bit about that. But that kind of can fall into a big bucket of like just common ailments that everyone deals with, and they sort of get over, like not get over it, but like literally just kind of deal with it without ever addressing the root. So like how long did it actually take for you to get that diagnosis and then start healing yourself?
It's very, very difficult to figure this out, partly because, as you said, these symptoms masquerade as so many things in your body, both mold and heavy metals, and and I think my symptoms actually started when I was a kid, and I don't really know when I got exposed to mold or heavy metals, but I think it probably started in my childhood. And just to give you guys a quick sort of background, I had um, three major surgeries before the age of 13. I was on antibiotics all the time as a kid. I had chronic ear infections. I had GI issues. I had multiple allergies, sinus issues, asthma-like symptoms. That's just when I was a kid, right? And then in my early 20s or as a young adult, I had chronic sinus problems. I had a hard time breathing. Ended up having a sinus surgery. Then later in my 30s is when I started getting migraines and skin rashes that just got worse and worse as I got into my 40s. I started gaining weight, and I also this brain fog started in my 40s, and so all these symptoms sort of just you get more and more and more stuff start accumulating, and it's hard to tell is what's causing this, right? And when you go through sort of a standard allopathic medicinal path, it's usually they give you drugs or surgery. And I had a lot of drugs and surgery in my life and did not fix things, or sort of just eliminated some symptoms. And so the first time I was sort of diagnosed with the mold was in 2017. And just to give you guys some story on that, it wasn't a straight line to like getting better because first of all, I didn't really understand what that meant that I had mold in my body. Like, what does that really mean? And some of the testing I had was really kind of fringe, type of testing that I was willing to accept and go with what the doctor recommended. And I started doing her therapy for 2 months, and I got a severe Hertz reaction. And from the die off of the mold and bacteria and everything I had in my body, which at the time I didn't really understand what was going on. I just realized that okay, I'm doing the treatment that they give me and I feel 10 times worse to the point that my sinuses were so bad I couldn't breathe at all. Like I couldn't breathe at night, I couldn't sleep. It was really, I felt really terrible. So after 2 months of treatments, I felt so much worse that I went back to my traditional sort of Western medicine ear, nose, and throat specialist that then told me that all my diagnostics and everything I had prior to that was quackery and that I shouldn't even do that. And basically, they just said that I should have another sinus surgery. And and I started doing some research on PubMed, and you look at some of the testing that I had, and there was no history of it. So I started believing what they told me, and I had another surgery. I had another sinus surgery, which temporarily, relieved my symptoms, and I was able to breathe well again. And sort of I dismissed this whole idea of having even problems with mold because I felt so much worse when I had the treatments, right? And so I never completed the treatment process. And I only did it about 2 months. And so for years, then I started getting all these other symptoms that were getting worse. And about a year ago, I went to 40 years of Zen to do neurofeedback, partly because I had such a terrible brain fog that was starting to come on. I really wanted to figure out what's going on with my brain. And the brain maps were showing that I had some biotoxin exposure. And that reminded me, like, oh, yeah, I had some issues with mold. I need to start investigating that. And that's when I started doing testing again through a different position, a different company, and also discovered this whole heavy metal issue. and realized that I have to take this really, really seriously. And I had to do everything I can to get both the mold and the heavy metals out of my body because it was affecting it was causing me like literally brain damage.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so serious. It wasn't just, you can dismiss your skin issues and all the other issues, but once your brain stops working, that you start paying attention to that because that is horrible.
I'm going to ask you a question you've probably never been asked. And yes, this is going to be out of left field, but certainly not in the way I work. Yeah, that's great. You did 40 years of Zen. You may or may not know this, but Dave Asprey is a friend of mine. And I look forward to taking that journey myself. So I really empathize with you with childhood ear infections, surgeries, being on antibiotics, been there, done that. I think I had like 3 or 4 ear surgeries growing up. And I'm curious if on your ayahuasca journey, your 40 years of Zen journey, if I saw a little smile there, if you did that to almost unpack maybe why that happened to you, was there something maybe in the background that led you towards that, like why you kept having issues with those different like openings in your head area? Yeah, just maybe expand on that if you looked at those types of journeys as a way to give you some insight, like why did this happen to me? Because I got to tell you, like, just honestly, as a kid going through that stuff, I'm only learning now how much that actually impacted me. So this is like deep shadow work around childhood stuff, and this could be helpful for someone listening if they've never really made that connection. Because there is actually a connection to when you're a kid and you have health stuff happen to you, how that can actually play out when you are a little bit older. So I'm curious if you've done any work in that area.
Yeah, definitely. You keep looking for answers anywhere you can, and you keep investigating, and I was working in the health and fitness industry, doing everything I can to be living the healthiest life possible. And yet I had all these health issues, right? And I didn't have the answer for that. And I was eating all organic foods and I was exercising my whole life, yet I was gaining weight and all these weird stuff was happening to me. And when I had this sort of spiritual opening that I was going through, I was starting to seek answers. That was also the reason why I went to 40 years of Zen, because I wanted to explore that more and have that personal growth, personal development. And it's just a side effect of that because you have this scientific overlay of looking at your brain scans and everything, sort of my physical health, it also shone a light to what else was going on in the rest of my body. But I went there for more of a spiritual growth and to be a better meditator, and I was hoping to come out as a Zen monk by the end of it, but instead I kind of learned I I mean, it's an amazing program, but one thing I'm so glad that sort of it shook me up and woke me up to the fact that I needed to do more testing around mold and heavy metals and go in that
Yeah.
direction.
And I think that's great because certain people are drawn to, say, ayahuasca or 40 years of Zen for different reasons. It just like keeps coming into their awareness. And when you start to have things that like pop up in dreams or enter your thoughts often, like pay attention to that stuff, even if it doesn't seem to make sense. Just like follow the little niggles sometimes.
Absolutely. And listening to your gut and your intuition, I'm really working on that now and trying to align sort of spiritually with my own sort of what is my purpose? Why am I here in this world? What am I to do for the rest of my life? I think a lot of people have these questions in their 40s and 50s when they go into that age of like, I want to do more than just, there got to be more to life.
It's like, how can we go through menopause and not feel like garbage. And what's really cool is, perimenopause, many menopausal women, this is actually what I see a lot of women doing, is actually entering biohacking at this stage in the game. And sometimes guys will do it a little bit sooner. We got to get stuff done. We got to, be as effective and efficient as we possibly can. How do I not burn myself out? How do I be superhuman? And for women, a lot of us, it's like, how can we restore our sleep? How can we manage our hormones? And how can we just feel as good as we used to and not let these physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, energetic changes start to run the show?
We have no choice but to be biohackers. Once you start going into perimenopause, it's like biohacking just to
Have to.
survive,
Yeah.
just to keep your brain working and figure out, what is my body doing to me, and just to feel better. And I, when I started my business, I was still in my late 30s, and I was working with all these women in their 50s that were complaining about all this stuff. It's hard to understand that until you start going through it yourself. And then you say, oh, I understand now what they were talking about.
Why do you think I'm working so hard now in my mid 30s so that I can cruise through that? It's like when we have these practices cultivated, it allows us to not only segue through different huge changes in our lives through like menopause, but also high stress situations like the world shutting down or needing to pivot and do things in a way that we can still continue to thrive, live our life's purpose, do our life's work. Why the heck are we here? The list goes on. I'm curious, Orshi, what skin irritation things showed up for you that was like, okay, something's going on? Because just a reminder, your skin's your largest organ. You got to start paying attention to it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I started getting these weird rashes on my face, especially under my eye. That's kind of where it started, with big red rashes on my cheeks, and kind of looked like autoimmune issues. And I investigated a lot of that, and I never got like a diagnosis specifically for that, but that's what it looked like. I would get these red kind of acne-like rashes, but they were not acne, and they would be very itchy. And then after sort of 2 weeks, they would go through this, like, they would peel, my skin would peel off, and sort of the rash would go away, and then it would come back again, with this kind of like huge inflammation, puffiness, and itching. And then in my 30s, that was just happening once in a while. And then in my 40s, it almost became like an everyday thing. Like it just wouldn't even go away. So it was just getting worse and worse.
Yeah, and sometimes even just like when I meet with clients through, skin consults, you can learn all about how you can work one-on-one with Katie and I at beautyandthebiohacker.com because yes, we do offer one-on-one services. We're not going to be doing that forever, that's for sure, but take advantage of that. But yeah, I love working with clients just to help stabilize their skin just with a couple of 5 easy steps that I do go through to mitigate that diffuse redness and irritation. So if you do that work, say with someone like myself, through some guidance, instead of trying to have at it and, go to the drugstore and pick up this product and that product, unfortunately, you're probably adding to your toxic load. But if you're doing that work and stuff is still popping up, that's definitely a key indication that you need to look a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I think it's very closely related to gut health. Your skin health and your gut health is really closely tied together. And I think, as I was mentioning the stress bucket before, the more you can empty your stress bucket, the better your skin's going to look as well. So, and of course, if you have heavy loads of toxicity, like I have, then for me, all this toxicity shows up on my skin. So, as Rachel said, our biggest detox organ is our skin.
So, Orshi, I'm curious what you've done, with your health, like especially on fitness and food. How has that changed since the diagnosis? Like, what are you doing now? How does it look different than what you did in your 30s?
So I have to really manage my stress level. One of the questions you had earlier is how how I'm managing all the stress with the detox. And I didn't really answer that, but things like, for example, the Oura ring that measures your readiness for the day and how rested you are. Things like that are really, I'm looking at that before I decide if I'm going to go and hit the gym or not, and really uh, do some heavy lifting and or doing hit training. I still exercise, but I'm a lot more mindful of how much I'm exercising, so I'm not over exercising. Right now, my number one priority is detoxing and to eliminating things from my body. And even good things like exercise, put stress in your stress bucket, so to speak. And so I think it's really important for people to be mindful of the overall stress load they have before they, run a Spartan race or to do a marathon or do these kind of crazy physical activities that put a lot of stress on your body. So when you have a lot of overall stress, mental, emotional, physical, other type of stress, um, you may be better off just going for a walk or doing a gentle yoga practice or something like that. So I think where I'm a lot more conscious of that now in my 40s and going through all this than before. I was literally just hitting the gym every day, thinking the more I was exercising, the better it was going to be. Partly because exercise is amazing. You get this beautiful endorphin rush,
You
and
gotta move that
you
chi.
you feel better. And yeah, I mean, I love it, and I love exercise, and I'm a huge fan of it. And I still exercise every day, but sometimes now the exercise is just going for a walk or doing more yoga type of slower type forms of exercise. So I don't push myself as hard.
I love that you mentioned the Aura Ring and looking at the readiness. And Katie and I, we did a really great solo episode talking about this. But just a couple of key takeaways from that is you get kind of this like activity tracker metric on the Aura Ring. And I find when I hit that consistently, my weight stays really stable. I stay nice and trim. I like the way my figure looks. And that is actually through kind of like lighter type exercises. And in the past, I'd be doing like an hour and a half of kickboxing or jujitsu, pad work, because my hubby's a pro athlete a couple of times a week. Like we're talking high intensity personal training, weightlifting. But I was actually rear ended really badly and I'm dealing with whiplash. So now I've actually evolved my fitness to be a little bit more on the lighter sides. But I also did a test through my Toolbox Genomics. Use the code B and B10 for 10% off of your test kit. And that showed me, I did the Nourish panel, but it did say that based on my genes and epigenetics, that lighter exercise just more consistently is actually better for me. And then the Aura Ring actually also corroborated that. So I find that really interesting. So, you don't have to hit the gym and do that, that hit training all the time. Is like just go by your readiness score. If you need to give yourself a little bit more time to rest and recover, lean into that. Give your body a little bit of grace that day. Maybe modify how much you also eat on those days so that that calorie kind of plays into account, calorie intake.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's good to have a mix of things. You definitely want to lift heavy weights at least once or twice a week. So you definitely want to build some muscle. I think keeping muscle in your body, especially as you're aging, is one of the most important things that you need to pay attention to. I do think that you need to do some form of a cardio activity, whether it's sort of a hit training type of cardio activity or going for a jog or something at least once a week or twice a week. And I think you also need to do things that are more mindfulness, flexibility related, like yoga. So I think it's good to have a combination. And then I think we should be moving every single day, but it could just be going for a walk. It doesn't have to be a
Yeah.
heavy hitting workout.
Yeah, you nailed it. And if I just share what I've seen, sort of like anecdotally and clinically with clients of mine in the 50s, 60s that are just crushing life, they have basically kind of like cardiovascular training, like he said, with jogging, getting the heart rate up, and also weightlifting, getting that bone density happening, which is really important for women. To prevent things like osteoporosis, the clinical data is out on that, so that claim's definitely substantiated. But also the flexibility and stability, which you're gonna get through things like yoga, which you're also gonna, mindfulness, energetically gonna get through things like qigong. So yeah, I love what you said that, and I certainly see people doing that. But you got to mix it up. Agree, definitely.
Yeah.
And so I guess this is a great segue to this whole idea of two worlds converging. And I personally see this biohacking space and fitness space really coming together. It's already starting to happen. People are quantifying their workouts in a very different way. They're quantifying how they work out every single day. So you're a fitness expert. You worked, in the fitness space for so many years. You've seen so many changes, I'm sure. What's your thoughts on like the next few years and how you see this space evolving?
Yeah, that's an amazing question. I really think that as we have more and more wearable technologies, when I started, we really didn't have much, and then about maybe 7+ years ago, when people started wearing heart rate monitors to work out, and we combined high intensity interval training with heart rate training, and that one piece of technology brought a lot of sort of feedback to people to say, okay, I'm in the right heart rate zone. And, the emphasis was more on fat burning. Everybody just wanted to burn as much fat as possible. I think the focus is going to start shifting from fat burning to optimizing your metabolic health and metabolic flexibility. I think that's where the shift is going to go towards. And I think going to be other variables that are going to come into play, such as continuous blood glucose monitoring, figuring out what is specifically the right diet for you, instead of everybody just being on a low carb or keto or whatever diet and say you fit into this box. I think it's going to be very individualized for what works for you specifically, what kind of foods, elevating your blood sugar, things like that. There's also, I think, when it comes to a whole bunch of other type of gadgets that are designed for recovery, you know, for because I think you can exercise as much as you can recover, right? So recovery is just as, if not more important than the exercise itself. So things like, cryotherapy, or, you know, um, a whole bunch of, like if you go to a place like Upgrade Labs, where you see all these sort of biohacking gear. I mean, that's already incorporated into the fitness world, right? And a lot of those are designed, for like photobiomodulation, things like that. All these sort of modalities are optimizing your recovery and your level of energy. And the more you can recover and the more energy you have, the more you can train, right? And the fitter you can get. And then all these tools that are now allowing us to optimize our metabolic health, like testing your microbiome, having specific supplementation to optimize our gut health. Like the DNA company does amazing supplements that are designed specifically to your genetics, that are more specific to you. So I think there's so much on both on the side of supplementation and wearable technologies, both for recovery and just to give you feedback of where you are at with your health. As you said, it's all converging, and it's all going to, I think, also incorporate this sort of mind, body, spirit of wellness into not just focus on the physical only, but integrating the other modalities
I
together.
couldn't agree more. I That's really where I start to see this all kind of taking shape. I totally see kind of this like proliferation of like brain hacking in combination with physical modalities. And so it'll be very exciting to watch over the next few years as more technology comes through. Well, Orshi, thank you so much for joining us today. This was such a pleasure. Thank you for sharing your story and the ways that you've been able to self heal. Where can people find you?
So people can find me at Biohacker Chick, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, all the different platforms.
And can they work with you there as well?
So at the moment, I don't do personal consultations with people. However, I put out a lot of content for free, and I'm really this is my way of serving people. So my hope is just to put information out so people can learn and start doing their own N-of-1 experiments, start experimenting themselves, see what works for them, and taking their personal health and wellness to the next level.
That's awesome. Well, it's wonderful to hear. Definitely go check out all of Orshi's amazing work and content, and make sure you subscribe to this podcast and YouTube channel and all of the things. Hit that bell, and you can meet us right back here next week on Beauty and the Biohacker. It's been such a pleasure, Orshi. Thank you again for taking the time.
Thank you so much.